Hopefully it will remain. I'm Jim Brett of the New England Council. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today to Politics and Eggs. And I'd like to give a shout out to, an awful lot of people give us credit, the Politics and Eggs, and how well we do, and we do. But I'd like to acknowledge the founder of the Politics and Eggs, and that's Fred Coker, who is here. And Fred, take a bow. There he's over here. Yeah. And I want to also begin by thanking Politics and Eggs sponsors, as you see around the wall here, all of the giant, corporate, generous neighbors here in this great state who have stepped up to the plate and supported the Politics and Eggs series. These breakfasts and the luncheons and other events that we have throughout the years, it does not happen by accident. It happens with the generous support of these corporate neighbors. So if you know anyone that's affiliated or works with these companies, you should thank them for being such a good corporate citizen. I'd also like to thank our partners here at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. A's. The New England Council could not ask for a better partner, to say the least, and we are grateful. We are grateful to our president, President Joe Fafaza, who has done an extraordinary job here at the college, a great leader, and we're fortunate to have him at the helm, and also Neil Levesque and his entire team at the Institute. They do a terrific job, so let's give them a warm appreciation. For all of us at the New England Council, this is our final event before Labor Day, but we'll be back in September with several other events on September 13th. We look forward to our first in-person Capitol Hill report with Massachusetts Congressman Jake Auchincloss, who took office just before the pandemic began. We'll be hearing from two members of the New England congressional delegation as part of our Capitol Conversation series in Washington next month, and that will be Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut and Congressman Stephen Lynch of Boston. And we expect to soon be announcing another Politics and Eggs program with another high-profile Republican leader very, very soon. So keep an eye on your inboxes. But today we're honored to welcome the former Vice President back to the Granite State for his second appearance at Politics and Eggs. And for purposes of a very formal introduction, I'm pleased to hand it over to my good friend, Neil Levesque, the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Institute of Politics.
Thanks, everyone. Welcome to the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College. We have a very distinguished guest today. Very pleased to have from all the way from Indianapolis, Indiana, our speaker. He's been married many years to his wife, Karen. They have 3 children. He went to Hanover College and then off to get his J.D. at the Indiana University. And then in 2001, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives and quickly made a name for himself. He was elected by his peers to chair the House Republican Conference, a feat in itself. It's like herding cats, I'm sure. And later, he became the 50th governor of Indiana. He served from 2013 to, of course, 2017. During that time, he enacted the largest tax cut in the state history, which is very important to us here in New Hampshire. And of course, we know in 2016, he became the 48th Vice President of the United States. So here today, we want to welcome you, Mr. Vice President.
Well, good morning, New Hampshire. It is wonderful to be back in the Granite State. Thank you all for coming out so bright and early. I'm honored to return. Honored to return to Politics and Eggs, where you prove every day it is never too soon or never too early to do politics or eggs in the great state of New Hampshire. Thank you all for coming out today. And I also want to thank Neil Levesque for those kind words. He did them all without a note, and I appreciate it very much. And also want to thank, of course, College President Dr. Joe Fafaza and Jim Brett, who I know will be back on stage in just a little bit. Jim and I share a common heritage that he may reflect on momentarily, but Jim, it is great to be with you, and Dr. Fafaza, it is an honor to be back at this storied institution. But good to see you all out. Since my last time here in 2019, my life has changed a fair amount. I moved back to Indiana. I bought 5 acres and a pond. Became a grandfather for the first time. Bought a riding mower that my wife actually lets me ride. You know, the good part about no longer being vice president is you get to drive your own car. The bad part is you get to pay for your own gas. And Karen and I, as I shared in Washington a few weeks ago, Karen and I learned a very sublime truth. It's maybe true only in America. And that is that you can be a congressman from your home state for 12 years. You can lead your state as governor for 4 years. You can even be vice president of the United States of America. But after it's all over, you're still going to wait 25 minutes for a table at Olive Garden on Saturday night. That actually happened. I sent my daughter a text, and she made me smile because she simply sat back an American flag and said, "Dad, that's America." And you know what? She's right. It's wonderful to be with you all. Our lives have all changed, haven't they, since 2019 in so many different ways. In many ways, today's country is almost unrecognizable to the secure and prosperous days of 2019, just a few short years ago. And following the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan 1 year ago this week, enemies of freedom around the world have been emboldened. The war has broken out with an unconscionable Russian invasion in Ukraine that now has reached its 6th month. North Korea has returned to its menacing threats, and China has returned to its military provocations across the Asia Pacific. Let me say a word about Afghanistan and that heartbreaking retreat that took place a year ago. To those of you in this room or those that might be looking on who wore the uniform over the past 20 years, who served in Afghanistan, let me say this. Nothing of that disastrous withdrawal will ever diminish your service to America or the sacrifice of our fallen over the last 20 years defending our freedom. And we thank you. And closer to home, I don't hardly have to tell you, inflation at a 40-year high, gasoline prices through the roof, the worst border crisis in American history. Our once booming economy has been brought to a screeching halt. Wages are plummeting, crime is skyrocketing, and the national debt is piling up by the day. And sadly, things are poised only to get worse. Yesterday, President Biden, with great fanfare in the East Room at the White House, signed what was called the Inflation Reduction Act, a massive $740 billion spending bill with more taxes, more spending, and the left's radical climate agenda built in it. At a time when we see Americans struggling with the cost of energy, they're continuing to push their radical green agenda. And at a time that our economy seems poised to collapse into a recession, Democrats have actually raised taxes on job creators and businesses all across this country, ultimately impacting consumers. I mean, I don't know if you've seen on the internet, but years ago it was President Obama who said famously, the last thing you ever want to do in a recession is raise taxes. But that's exactly what Joe Biden and the Democrats in Congress have done. I think in a very real sense they poured gasoline on a raging fire that's burning down the American economy. And truthfully, they'll not only not defeat inflation, but likely, just like the $1.9 trillion COVID bill that they passed in the early months of this administration, it's very likely another near $1 trillion in spending will once again reignite a growth in inflation in this country to the hardship of American families. In the midst of all of that, I'm sure you all heard, they've also authorized the hiring of 87,000 IRS agents. You know, when Ronald Reagan spoke in 1964 about a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital who thought they could plan our lives better than we can plan them for ourselves, I think you could scarcely imagine the big government socialism or the left-wing climate agenda that's being implemented in Washington, D.C. today. As we gather here today, I submit to all of you, as I've said around the country, American freedom is under attack as never before. Big media, big government, even big business have locked arms to advance a pernicious, woke agenda designed to control the American people and destroy the American dream. The ruling elites in Washington have never been more out of touch with the values and ideals of everyday Americans. All that being said, I have hope. I can't help but think of a story that 40th president, who spent a fair amount of time in the Granite State years ago, used to love to tell. It's a story of a farmer who took his cow to market. He loaded the cow into the back of the truck, and the dog jumped into the cab, and as the story goes, they drove into town, got in a traffic accident. And after he survived, they ended up in court, and the attorney for the other driver involved in the accident was cross-examining the farmer. And he said, "Would you care to tell us what happened in the accident?" And he said, "Yeah, I had my cow in the back, I had my dog." And he said, "This guy, he just runs straight through the intersection, and, we had a terrible crash. And dog went in one ditch, cow went in the other ditch." And he said, "Sir, but isn't it true when the sheriff showed up after the accident and asked you how you felt, you said, 'I never felt better in my life'?" And the farmer said, "Well, yeah, I reckon I did say that." And he said, "No further questions." And then his own attorney got up, what the lawyers in the room know is called redirect, and he said, "Would you care to explain the circumstances of what happened?" And he said, "Well, I reckon I would." He said, "After the accident," he said, "I woke up, I seen that sheriff cross the road. He walked over to my dog, who was all beat up and wasn't going to make it, and he pulled his revolver out, and he laid the gun down by the dog's head, and he put that dog out of its misery." And he said, "Then he walked over and saw that cow. It must have had a broke back, and we weren't going to save it. And he got his gun out, and he put it down by the cow and put the cow down. And he said, then he walked across the street, looked down at me, and said, 'And how are you feeling?' And I said, 'I never felt better in my life.'" But I got to tell all of you, I never felt better in my life. Even in these challenging times, I see an energy across this country like I've never seen before. I was there in 2010, the last time we retired Nancy Pelosi. I'm going to tell you, it's going to be bigger this year. Help is on the way. We're going to deliver a great conservative victory all across New Hampshire and all across America in November of 2022. Are you with me? 82 days from now, I think the American people are going to start a great American comeback. We're going to take back the House. We're going to take back the Senate. And just as importantly, we're going to elect and re-elect great conservative governors like your Governor Chris Sununu, who's done such an extraordinary job here in New Hampshire. But it's going to be important about what our message is in those days, and it's what's animated my travels around the country in so many ways. I mean, the truth is the conservative movement has always been built on the notion that ideas have consequences. Conservatism is bigger than any one moment, any one election, any one person. And it's always been about ideas. And I'm proud to say under the Trump-Pence administration, it was those ideas that we put into practice that transformed America, transformed American security and prosperity as never before. by putting common sense conservative principles into practice, a strong national defense, free market economics, conservatives on our courts, and unapologetically putting America first on the world stage, we achieved the lowest unemployment, the highest household income, the most pro-American trade deals, the most secure border, and we made the most powerful military in the history of the world even more powerful. It's true. But I came here today not to look backwards, but to look forward. Because elections are about the future. And I truly do believe, now more than ever, leaders in our party here in New Hampshire and all across America need to be focused on the challenges facing the American people today and offer positive, proven solutions for tomorrow. I mean, in 2022, I think we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to save America from the decline and decay brought on by progressive policies. And I think we also have an opportunity to elect a truly durable governing majority in Washington, D.C. and in state houses around the country. To accomplish that, we must be the loyal opposition. We must be prepared to say what's wrong with what they're doing. And as I've already begun today, you hear I never hesitate to do that. It's important that we be the loyal opposition. But the Bible says, without a vision, the people perish. And what's true of a people is also true of a movement. And I would submit to each and every one of you, in order to win, in order to have an election that's not just victorious, but an election that's a realignment election that sets the stage for durable American renewal, we need to do more than criticize and complain. We need to unite our movement around a bold, optimistic agenda that will give real solutions for the American people. That's why I founded an organization in Washington, D.C. last year called Advancing American Freedom. We brought together maybe 50 of the best conservative minds in the country, many of which I know have spoken here at Politics and Eggs. And I essentially asked them this question. I said, can you take the better part of a year and summarize what the ideas that have animated this movement from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump are? We put it all in one place and called it the Freedom Agenda. You can actually look for it online later, or even now if you're watching long distance at advancingamericanfreedom.com. It was a collaborative effort of people that literally forged that movement. And we built it on three essential pillars with one solid foundation. Those pillars are a commitment to unapologetic defense of American culture, a commitment to American prosperity built on freedom, and a commitment to American leadership in the world. And all those ideas we set on top of a commitment to the Constitution of the United States of America. First and foremost, by focusing on culture. Our freedom agenda was built on the principle that politics is downstream from culture, as the late Andrew Breitbart famously said. The truth is, if we continue to allow the radical left dumping toxic waste into the headwaters of our culture, our politics are going to become even more poisonous over time. And the culture we seek to preserve as conservatives is a culture handed down by generations of Americans since the days of this founding. The belief that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness. I think it's important to note that the first among those inalienable rights is life. And I couldn't be more humbled to have been a small part of an administration that saw to the appointment of 3 conservative justices on the Supreme Court of the United States that just a few short months ago rendered a decision that sent Roe v. Wade to the ash heap of history where it belongs and gave America a new beginning for life. After 50 years of praying and fasting and working and hoping and generous and compassionate efforts of millions of Americans, we have a new beginning. But the truth is, we've only come to the end of the beginning. As I've said around the country, now we must take the case for life to every state house in America. We must also work to expand support for women in crisis pregnancies, to support the unborn and the newborn with equal vigor and generosity. We want adoption to be easier and more affordable for everyday Americans. And finally, we want to end all taxpayer funding of abortion and abortion providers once and for all. Beyond that core commitment to life and our commitment to restore the sanctity of life to the center of American law, our agenda calls for defending religious liberty and defending the freedom of speech from this era of censorship, coercion, and cancel culture, to securing our border and protecting our communities against violent criminals, to ending critical race theory in our schools and offering an agenda to our children that upholds and celebrates the progress that we have made toward a more perfect union throughout our history. We call for enacting universal school choice, which the state of Arizona just did. And I'm proud to say when I was governor of Indiana, we doubled our school choice program. We also call for ending the assault on women's sports by adherents of radical gender ideology and through it all defending the God-given Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. The culture begins with defending those ideals that are enshrined in our Bill of Rights, in our Constitution, and in the hearts of millions of Americans. But secondly, our agenda is built on a promotion of economic freedom. I mean, we can restore the vitality of our economy through applying free market principles, not more spending, more taxes, and more government that this current administration is advancing. The American free enterprise system is the most powerful economic engine in the history of the world. No other system has created more wealth, lifted more people out of poverty, or improved the quality of life for more people on planet Earth. And we know how to fix this economy. We did it before, not too long ago. By cutting taxes, rolling back regulation, unleashing American energy, fighting for free and fair trade, we gained 7 million new jobs in 3 short years. Unemployment plummeted to the lowest rate in 50 years. Unemployment rates for African Americans and Hispanic Americans was the lowest ever recorded. And household income soared by nearly $6,000, which was a new record, with 10 million people lifted off poverty. Our agenda calls for making the Trump-Pence tax cuts permanent, restoring American energy independence, and supporting reciprocal trade deals that bring American jobs back home. And finally, a freedom agenda requires that we be committed to American leadership and security, a commitment to live out our obligation as the arsenal of democracy. And the truth is, this administration has been growing government at home as never before in my lifetime or yours, and at the same time has flatlined military spending. Now, I couldn't be more proud during our administration that after years of reckless budget cutbacks, we saw to the investment of nearly $3 trillion in defense spending, including $740 billion in 2021. We actually also secured more than $400 billion in additional defense spending by our NATO allies, because America's allies in freedom must do their share as partners in freedom, and they began to do it under our administration. And lastly, we created the first new branch of our armed forces in 75 years with the establishment of the United States Space Force. You know, I love what John Adams said so many years ago, that America must never, quote, go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Our objective as a nation has never been to impose our ideals or values on any nation, nor should it ever be. But we must always be prepared. And in this time of great power competition with the Chinese Communist Party, with the resurgent Russia, we have to have a military fit to the task. Finally, our Freedom Agenda provides a clear roadmap for conservative leaders, I believe, to have the ability to deeply connect with the aspirations of the American people. You know, as your vice president, as the governor of the state of Indiana, it was these ideas that I saw animated the crowds as we traveled all across the country. I mean, it was many people that don't understand our movement thought that it was driven by a personality. And there's no question, from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump, we have had our share of big personalities in this party. And I expect we will again. But I must tell you, as I spoke to crowds large and small around the country, it was the ideas that created the roar. It was the commitment to those American values that brought people out, and I believe provides a foundation. And all these values, whether it be culture, whether it be prosperity, whether it be leadership, are all built on the foundation of the Constitution of the United States of America. I believe our agenda and our party must recognize that the Republican Party may actually be the last line of defense for the Constitution of the United States. You know, for most of our history, both political parties were committed to the ideals enshrined in our founding documents. But sadly, that's no longer the case. We live in a time when leaders in the Democratic Party routinely demean the American founding. Democrats have made efforts to rewrite our Constitution, our Second Amendment, to redefine the liberties enshrined in the Bill of Rights. You need to look no further than the assaults on religious liberty, the assaults on freedom of speech taking place in our campuses and our schools to see whereof I speak. And it was last year that it was Senate Republicans that rightly rejected an effort by Democrats to nationalize our elections, even though the Constitution contemplates that elections are governed at the state level, which is something I hardly need to tell this first-in-the-nation state. So as we forge this agenda for the future of our party, I think we need to make it clear that the Republican Party will always defend the principles at the heart of our republic. If we don't, no one else will. You know, every office holder in this country takes the same oath of office. It's the same oath our military take. The same oath my son, who's a captain in the Marine Corps, took, and my unworthy son-in-law, who's a lieutenant in the Navy, took the same. I took that oath as a congressman, as a governor, and I took that oath on Ronald Reagan's Bible to be your vice president. And the American people have to know that the Republican Party will always keep our oath to the Constitution, even when it would be politically expedient to do otherwise. The Bible says he keeps his oath even when it hurts. I have some experience with that. But I must tell you, I truly do believe the American people are looking for men and women of conviction who understand the wellspring of this nation's liberties and the Constitution and the Declaration and are prepared to defend it. Now more than ever, America needs the Republican Party to be the party of the Constitution. So the need has never been greater for a unified conservative action around a unified conservative agenda. And it's what's carried me all across the country, and I'll continue to carry me these 82 days and wherever the Lord leads after that. And the truth is, we have an extraordinary opportunity to build a lasting majority in this country. But I think it only comes if, in addition to telling the American people what's wrong with their ideas, we remind them what's right about our ideas and how our ideas are grounded in the principles of American freedom upon which this nation was founded. So I thank you for the opportunity to come today. You know, we've all been through a lot over the past 2 years. A global pandemic, civil unrest, a divisive election, a tragic day at our nation's capital, and a Democrat administration that seems intent on growing big government socialism and weakening America at home and abroad. But as I said before, I'm incredibly optimistic. I'm optimistic because I've had the great privilege over the last 20 years to get to know the American people in ways that I never thought I would. I've met people in big cities and small towns. I've met them in good times and in bad. I've seen the character of the people of this country. The American people always rise to the challenge. Visit a scene of a hurricane, visit a scene of a flood, seeing the way thousands of perfect strangers show up and spend their time and their treasure to help people that they never met before and will never see again. That's America. And this is a great country. I can't help but think of Solomon's prayer that I read in my devotions just the other day, when he asked God that he would give him a discerning heart to distinguish between right and wrong. And he added, "For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" I can testify firsthand, having served 4 years as your vice president, having traveled across this country over the last 20 years in various roles. This is a great people. And America has a great future if we will simply give America government as good as our people. And I believe we will. But it'll take all of us to do it. And so to all of you that share our values and share our convictions, I just urge you to do everything in your power. In these 82 days, do not rest, do not relent, do not pass go, do not collect $200 until we retire Nancy Pelosi once and for all. And we send a new Republican senator from New Hampshire to a new Republican majority on Capitol Hill in the United States Senate. The future's bright if we focus on the future. Now, I know there are some that want to make this election about the past, but elections are always about the future. I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds the future. And I have faith that as long as the Republican Party is the party of the future, the American people will rally to our cause. Because I have faith. Faith, as I've said, in the American people, but I also have faith in Him who established this miracle of democracy on these wilderness shores. You know, I'm always inspired when I come to New England. Because in Indiana, we don't have the tourist sites that you all have. I'm a student of American history, the American founding, and these are storied places in which you live. Where against all odds, against the most powerful force in the world, freedom was minted. But it all began with faith. From people who believed that they were called by providence to create a shining city on a hill. And we have. America is the greatest nation in the history of the world because we have a great people who believe in freedom and because we have ever put our trust in this one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. And so long as we keep that faith, the best days for the greatest nation on earth are yet to come. Thank you all for having me this morning. It's a great honor to be back in New Hampshire. God bless you all.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. As he indicated, that we have a personal connection. It appears that the Vice President's grandfather immigrated to the United States from Ireland in the early 1920s. He came from a little town in County Sligo called Tuppacurry. Well, guess what? In the early 20s, my father also came to this country, also from Tuppacurry. Now, it's a small village, and the chances are good that the two men knew of each other. Perhaps they were even cousins. Who knows? But what I do know, and I am sure...
Let's say they were.
No. What I am sure that the Vice President will agree with me is that we are glad those men made the decision to come to America, the land of opportunity. Okay. Mr. Vice President, so much has gone on. since you left office, I must ask this question. What was going through your mind when the Department of Justice issued a warrant, an affidavit, to search the residence of Mar-a-Lago, and when they retrieved 11 boxes, some said top secret, some said secret, some said confidential, some said top secret with secret intelligence. What was going through your mind?
Well, Cousin Jim, thank you for the wonderful reflections, and it means a great deal to me. It actually does, for reasons I could tell people in this room know. But let me begin by saying, look, it's fairly well known that President Trump and I have had our differences. But after years during our administration that saw the politicization of the FBI, where during the tenure of Director Comey it was revealed that FBI agents were promoting political agendas in their official capacities, I was deeply troubled to learn that a search warrant had been executed at the personal residence of a former president of the United States. I was overseas at the time, traveling with my wife on vacation, but I still felt it was important to weigh in, and I called on Attorney General Garland to give the American people a full accounting of the reasons why this action was necessary. And while he's begun to do so, he's not nearly enough information has been provided. And I'm going to continue to call on the Attorney General to make that information available to the American people, make it available to the intelligence committees that are competent in dealing with classified information. I mean, never before in American history has the personal residence of a former president been subject to a search warrant. And in the wake of the 4 years that we endured with the politicization of the FBI, the American people have a right to know the basis for this. This unprecedented action does demand unprecedented transparency. That said, earlier today and elsewhere, I also want to remind my fellow Republicans, we can hold the Attorney General accountable for the decision that he made without attacking rank and file law enforcement personnel at the FBI. The Republican Party is the party of law and order. Our party stands with the men and women who serve on the thin blue line at the federal and state and local level. And these attacks on the FBI must stop. Calls to defund the FBI are just as wrong as calls to defund the police. And the truth of the matter is, we need to get to the bottom of what happened. We need to let the facts play out. But more than anything else, the American people need to be reassured in the integrity of our justice system, and the very appearance of a recurrence of politics playing a role in decisions at the Justice Department demands transparency as never before. And I will continue to call on the Attorney General and the Justice Department to make that information available to the American people, and do so now.
And that's all right. The January 6th committee, do you think they are providing a public service to the citizens of this country? Are they providing information that none of us was aware of? And overall, what kind of a grade or evaluation would you give them?
January 6th was a tragic day. in the history of our country, not just for those of us that lived through it at the Capitol, but for every American. I mean, to see our historic Capitol ransacked, I must tell you, angered me that day. But thanks to the heroic efforts of law enforcement, Capitol Hill Police, federal law enforcement, the violence was quelled. And what began as a day of tragedy, I believe, was ultimately a triumph of freedom. Because on the very same day of the worst attack on our Capitol since 1812, the American people and the world witnessed the elected representatives of this country reconvene and seated the orderly transition of power under the Constitution of the United States. Now, I must tell you that the American people have a right to know what happened that day. And in the months and years ahead, I'll be telling my story even more frequently than I have. I just finished writing a book that begins with that grandfather he mentioned coming over from Ireland, and it ends with the day that I left office and every day in between. But I must tell you that whatever the intentions of the January 6th committee, I was disappointed when Speaker Pelosi broke tradition in the Congress where I served for 12 years and refused to seat Republican members that were appointed by the minority leader. It simply had never been done. I mean, the tradition in the Congress is the majority gets a majority of seats on committees and the minority gets a minority of seats. And each side gets to pick who sits in those seats. Right up until then. And I think it was a missed opportunity for the American people. I was on Capitol Hill on 9/11 as well. The 9/11 Commission did a great service to the country because they went above politics. They brought together men and women that were respected on both sides of the aisle that came and were able to learn what we could learn about what led to that fateful day in 2001. And Jim, I can't help but feel whatever the intentions of this in the very beginning, that it's, and whatever new information's come out to the American people, and more will come, I think the opportunity that we had to bring the country together to learn the lessons that we should learn from that day and to internalize them going forward, and ultimately to celebrate those, beginning with law enforcement who made it possible for it to be a victory for freedom. It's been a missed opportunity.
Just to stay on that, Jeremy, if they were to call you, the committee, to come and testify, talk, would you be agreeable?
Well, I would, if there was an invitation to participate, I would consider it. But you've heard me mention the Constitution a few times this morning. On the Constitution, we have 3 co-equal branches of government. And any invitation to be directed to me, I would have to reflect on the unique role that I was serving in as Vice President. It would be unprecedented in history for a Vice President to be summoned to testify on Capitol Hill. But as I said, I don't want to prejudge. If there's ever any formal invitation rendered to us, we'd give it due consideration. But my first obligation is to continue to uphold my oath and continue to uphold the framework of government enshrined in the Constitution that has created the greatest nation in the history of the world. And we'll do that. And we'll do that.
We have time for a couple of questions. We have 2 outstanding students, Isabel and Connor, that have the microphone. So if you raise your hand, just wait until either one of them comes by. We usually start off with our friends from AARP with the questions. So just identify yourself.
Thank you. My name is Alan Cohen from AARP.
Hi, Alan.
Hello. One of our favorite topics is Medicare. Medicare provides critical health coverage for tens of millions of older Americans.
Right.
What would you do to strengthen Medicare in the future?
Well, I'm really proud. I'd point you to my record when I was governor of the state of Indiana on what we did on health care reform, particularly with Medicaid. Look, we have a solemn promise to the American people that we've made in Medicare and in Social Security, and we'll keep that promise. There are very few more strong bipartisan convictions on Capitol Hill than that. But I do believe we've got to continue to look for ways, as we did in our administration, as I did when I was governor, to modernize these systems, to put patients in charge, to give what we call consumer-directed health care its day, because ultimately that will result in better outcomes for people and greater control over your own health care choices. So I think it's important that we always keep our commitments and make it clear to seniors. And as we go into election season, we're always hearing about what Republicans are going to do to Social Security or Medicare. It's not going to happen. But I do think what has to happen, and there's a fiscal element to it as well. We can reform these systems, provide better services, give Americans more choices over their health care decisions, and ultimately, at the end of the day, by giving people better choices and better incentives, you have better outcomes, better health, and that actually ends up reducing the cost in the long term to taxpayers.
Tell me, you had your hand down? Your hand up, I'm sorry. Mic over.
Thank you. Steve Stepanek, chairman of the party here in New Hampshire, Republican Party, that is. As you know, the Republican Party reinforced the First of the Nation primary schedule, carve-out schedule back in the spring.
Good.
And unfortunately, it doesn't look like Democrats are going to follow suit. What is your opinion of that?
New Hampshire is the first in the nation primary, period, paragraph. And I must say, I also heard that they're looking to look the other way on Iowa. And I just think, I think tradition is important. I think I've never spent a lot of time in New Hampshire, but I may someday. And there's something about what you people do here that's on both sides of the aisle that I think has contributed to the quality of leadership that we've generated in this country. I truly believe that. It's get them off the big stages and get them off the television screens and put them in the living room. I remember Senator Richard Lugar, the late Senator Richard Lugar, who was a great friend of mine, who had a short sojourn into presidential politics in 1996. Senator Lugar told me one time memorably how much he enjoyed being in New Hampshire. He said, Mike, there's nowhere in America that reminded me more of Indiana than New Hampshire. And in my little experience here, the privilege I had to come and go, I think I'm starting to figure out what he meant. Strong communities, strong families, strong commitment to the bedrock values that have made the country great. And that, to me, Steve, must remain the cauldron in which we forge American leadership for generations to come. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Mr. Vice President. Amy Carnevale. I'm with K&L Gates, also affiliated with the Massachusetts Republican Party.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for your service. And as you talked about this morning, the Trump-Pence administration achieved many remarkable policy successes for New Englanders, including energy policy, deregulation, Operation Warp Speed, and economic growth. As you're thinking ahead to talking with specifically to Republican voters who may be active in the nomination process in 2023. Could you talk a little bit more about how you articulate your message specifically for those Republicans?
Well, I just think it really, Amy, begins just with reminding people that we're the party of ideas. I mean, there's that old saying that, Republicans run for office and worry that people aren't going to know what they want to do. And Democrats run for office and worry that voters are going to actually know what they want to do, right? I mean, so I think making sure as we deliver a great victory this fall, that in the days ahead we got men and women contesting at every level that are articulating a vision for where we want to go. I think the American people, my experience is the American people are ultimately very fair-minded. And by that I mean there's only so much time I have for you to tell me what's wrong with the other person's idea. Now you need to tell me what's right about yours. I was on Chris Ryan's radio show this morning, and he kind of affirmed what I'd said by saying, yeah, we know what the problems are. We actually don't need candidates that are simply reciting the problems. We need candidates that can recite the solutions, and that's going to be my message going forward. And I'm going to be encouraging all of my friends who have aspirations at every level to be doing the same, because I think ultimately that's what drove our movement to 74 million votes in 2020. It's what drove us to that historic election in 2016. And while the media focused on personalities and controversies and the back and forth of politics, what I saw everywhere I went was the American people saying, we have a ticket that says we can be strong again, we can be prosperous again, we can build it all on all the things that have always made America strong and good and free. And that's what rallied that movement, and that's what will rally our movement and lay a foundation to win back the country in 2024.
Mr. Vice President Peter Abbott, the British Consul General to New England, I represent that former greatest military power that you referred to a couple of times in your remarks.
Thank you, Consul General.
But it's lovely to talk to you, lovely to meet you today. I wanted to ask you about NATO and about international alliances. You mentioned NATO spending, which I know has been an issue for Republican presidents over the years. I'm pleased to say that the United Kingdom has always been the second largest defence contributor to NATO after the United States. We take our burden sharing responsibility very seriously. But I wanted to pick up your comments. Thank you.
It's true. It's actually true.
I wanted to pick up on your comments about big power competition, about China, about Russia, and ask you specifically about how America should be working with its international partners to tackle those threats. Thank you very much.
Well, Consul General, thank you so much for your words, and I'm glad my reference to so long ago is not too soon for you all. And let me affirm what you said. I mean, if one of the things that I learned as a member of Congress on the Foreign Affairs Committee, one of the things that I learned as Vice President was the special relationship the United States has with the UK. It truly is extraordinary. One of my disappointments in not being hired on for another 4 years is that we'd set the table for a free trade agreement post-Brexit with the UK, and we'd begun preliminary discussions. It's still an idea whose time has come. We ought to have a free trade agreement with the UK. We have no stronger ally in the Western world. Okay? And let me also say, I'm incredibly proud of the fact, not only, and this isn't, as I've said, I've got a couple that wear the uniform now in my immediate family. My dad was a combat veteran in Korea. Karen's dad was an Air Force captain. I mean, the fact that we were able to rebuild our military is a source of great pride to me, and maybe the most important thing that we did in our 4 years. But the fact that we also got our NATO allies to step up and make commitments for $400 billion in burden sharing. South Korea made all new commitments in burden sharing. Japan, the same. After years where there was a lot of happy talk, and it feels like we've gotten back to happy talk with our allies, we actually had a president who had been a landlord. And he talked about our alliances like, you need to pay the bill, right? And I remember, boy, I made the first trip overseas as vice president to Europe, and everybody over there was real nervous in February of 2017. because they'd heard America first and they were all worried about what they called new American isolationism. And no, what they were hearing was America providing leadership for the free world again. And I have to tell you, the tragic events, the unfolding, unconscionable war in Ukraine has now, if there's one silver lining, it may be now that what we began in the Trump-Pence administration has now been minted on the continent of Europe, and they understand the very real threat. The expansion of NATO, our Senate just recently endorsed, is vitally important. But I want to affirm to you that we just have no greater ally in Europe, broadly defined, than the UK. And I'm also can tell you, my son actually deployed for 8 months on the HMS Queen Elizabeth. They actually took a Marine contingent of pilots out with him, and so he was landing on that deck day in and day out, and it's an extraordinary relationship. And you all deserve to know whether Persian Gulf War, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, Operation Iraqi Freedom, it's absolutely true to say, while we occasionally differ on politics, occasionally differ on agenda, when we go, UK goes. And we'll always be grateful to you. So God bless you, Consul General, and please convey my regards.
One more, young lady.
Hi, I'm Sandy Hennequin. I'm with Liberty Utilities. And first of all, I wanted to thank you for your commitment to the first in the nation, New Hampshire being first in the nation. I've lived here, how long, I guess, 22 years, and it's part of the fabric of our state. So appreciate that. But
part of the fabric of America.
True. But my question isn't about that. My question is, when you were talking about the freedom agenda, one of the issues that I was wondering if you could touch on is where energy fits in there and kind of what your vision on, and this group vision is on energy issues.
I just went by it real fast. But if you go to advancingamericanfreedom.com, you'll see we spent a lot of time on it. Our organization has actually spent the better part of $10 million already in the last 4 months on ads around the country promoting a return to American energy independence. We've been running them in congressional districts around the country, urging Americans to call their member of Congress. I mean, it is extraordinary. It is extraordinary to see the damage that this administration did in a short period of time to the historic progress that we made on energy independence in the Trump-Pence administration. We actually achieved energy independence for the first time in 75 years by allowing the responsible exploration of oil and natural gas in Alaska and in public lands around the country. As you know, we became a net exporter of energy for the first time in 3/4 of a century. I mean, we're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. And there was an incredible amount of capital investment, I visited so many of these sites around the country. In the American economy, I believe in many respects that booming economy before the pandemic hit so hard was driven by low-cost, affordable energy that shows up on families' budgets, but it's a driving force behind manufacturing in this country, right? And this administration on day one, literally day one, President Joe Biden comes in and shut down the Keystone and Dakota pipeline, literally offlined, millions of acres of federal lands for responsible exploration. The Alaska National Wildlife Region that we'd gotten approved, taken off the docket. And lo and behold, gasoline prices started to go through the roof. I know they like to blame high gas prices on the war in Ukraine, but gasoline prices were up 50% before the first shot was fired in the war in Ukraine. I mean, high energy prices in America are not a result of the war in Ukraine, they're a result of the war on energy, and it has got to stop.
Thank you.
That's why we've been running ads all over the country. We're continuing to carry that message across the country, and the American people are with us. I'll leave you with one thought. Serving in the well of Congress, you sit there for long votes so you get a chance to look around. There's only a few things written on the walls of the chamber of the chamber where the House of Representatives meets. One is E pluribus unum, which is one out of many on the top. One is famously the words, "In God we trust," above the American flag. But much lesser known is a plaque that speaks to the point you raised. It's a quote from Daniel Webster, and it's just above the American flag, out of the line of sight for major speeches. But I remember reading it one time in a debate over American energy when I was in the Congress. And Daniel Webster essentially said, "Let us develop the resources of this land and call forth its power, that we might do something in our time worthy to be remembered." I mean, one of the greatest leaders of the first century of American history spoke about the central focus of the God-given natural resources of this country to our nation's greatness. And I truly do believe if we're going to achieve another great American century, if we're going to continue to lead the world for freedom, we've got to recognize that the source of that American greatness is our faith in God, our freedom, and our vast natural resources. And if we strengthen all three, there's a boundless American future that awaits. So thank you very much. It's a joy to be with you today, and God bless you here in the Granite State.